All right. Well, I know I have several of them. I was a security guard for a while, and a couple of the companies I worked for, they were very toxic places to work for. And of course, the military is not noted for being toxic free, especially back in the time period I was in the military. There was a lot of toxicity. And that really makes it difficult. You don't have a drive, a motivation to go to work if all you're experiencing is a toxic work environment. So when you are a leader, you want to make sure and be cognizant that you allow for your team to experience a toxic free environment. And psychological safety is a great way to do that. Can everybody see my slide deck now?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so this is week 2. That can't be week 2. Give me 1 second here. I think I either made a mistake on the file or in the name of the file. So give me 1 second to figure out what is going on here. Week 4, Wednesday. Let's try this one. Okay, it says week 2. Well, we'll fix that real quick. That's an easy fix. Save, and now we're going to share. Okay, that problem should be solved. Let me pull it back up now. There we go. Got the right thing there. Even corrected that mistake. Week 4. So right now, at the end of this week, you will be 1/4 the way done with this semester. So you've survived to week 4, and now we click this little button over here. Where'd my cursor go? I swear it just disappeared. Okay, there we go. You need to know each of the people that work for you. If you are a team leader, know your team. If you're a business owner, know your employees. Clark recommends that leaders take time to actually know each person on their team in order to better provide contributor safety. Now, knowing somebody, it means more than just you know their name and their function or the position they were hired to. Try to get to know a little bit about them. Try to learn maybe what their hobbies are, if they have family, where they went to college. And that's something you're going to find is as you get out in the workforce and you run into people that graduated from Cleary University, you're going to have a connection. When I run into people from either Liberty University or Walden University, there is a bond that happens because you're both alumni from that institution. That can also help when you put your application in, because if somebody is an alumni from the same school as you and they are in charge of going through the applications and they see somebody from their school, they're going to pay attention, or at least more attention, to your resume or CV. So make sure that you properly note that on your resume, your CV, and I highly recommend professional networking. And part of that is using something like LinkedIn and having your profile completely filled out so that recruiters can actually find you. Because sometimes they look, and when they see what school you graduated from, they will give you a ring, and you want that. So Clark, he mentioned that we need to carefully evaluate each team member and their contributions to the team. So this evaluation isn't necessarily the same thing as when you do a performance review. When you sit down to write a performance review, which I've written many of those in my day, you're basing this off of your entire interaction, plus moments in time that you specifically observe that individual and how they function in their capacity. So you may want to, and I don't have it with me, but I got a little leather field notes journal that I usually keep with me. It's in my briefcase right now in the other room. And I just jot notes down in there. And I do this for class. I've done this for years. Picked it up and picked this habit up when I was in the military. And it's good because you might be going through your day and you observe Mr. Smith over there, he's doing his job great. He's actually being very exceptional. And you notice something he's doing, you just jot the note down instead of trying to remember every detail. So when it comes time to write performance reviews, you've got some data that you can use. But when you're getting to know your team for psychological safety purposes, this is more informal. It's in the daily interactions that you have with them in the work environment and in the parking lot and in the elevator, the coffee break room and everything, okay? So there are those that are natural contributors, and Clark listed several attributes of natural contributors. They gravitate toward discussions. They don't shy away from entering into that discourse in the break room about a project that they're working on, and they may bounce ideas off of you and get new ideas from you, and they're formulating more creative thoughts in the process. They're coming up with more things they can use to contribute. So they welcome discussions. They enjoy engaging in problem solving. So instead of seeing a problem as other people's problem, if it's the team's problem, then they are willing to jump into it and work at solving it. That's another key factor or attribute. The last attribute that Clark mentioned is they are willing, or they willingly engage in the thrust and parry of a discussion. My ex, we were supposed to get married, we were engaged, and the whole thing fell apart after I caught her being inappropriate. But in our discussions we would have, she was not capable or willing to engage in a thrust and parry of a discussion. When the thrust and parry came up, she thought it was an argument. What the thrust and parry is if I'm presenting something in a discussion and you have a counterpoint, you are more than welcome to interject that counterpoint. I then hear your counterpoint and I either accept it, store it for future use, or reject it. Accept, reject, or store. And this is that back and forth of a discussion. And if somebody like my ex sees that as being argumentative, then you're missing out on the rich reward that a discussion can actually provide. Because it is that thrust and the parry action, almost like a sword fight without it being an argument. But it's that thrust and parry, that back and forth, that almost, how do I put it without saying the word fight? It's not a fight, it's a discussion, but you're intellectually debating something. Debate, that's the word. That debate can lead to more clarity. It can help you unravel problems. It can help you find solutions. And so these people, the natural contributors, welcome that. Not everybody does. And you as a leader are going to learn those people that are more willing to engage in that form of discussion and those that actually do not like it and they avoid it. And then as a leader, then it's up to you to know how to motivate that person to engage in a discussion in a way where you can get ideas from them and they can also begin to challenge your ideas. Because that thrust and parry is contributing ideas and challenging that contribution. So while we're not in the contributor, well, we are in a contributor, we're not in the challenger stage of psychological safety, we're preparing our team to move into it. So those that do not normally naturally contribute, gotta move my little Zoom box, there we go. Clark mentioned some people are more introspective or critical thinkers. Critical thinkers does not mean that they criticize everything in their thoughts, but rather they look at things and they break it down and analyze it. They evaluate things and they enter the conversation that way with these thoughts that come from these evaluations. And these introspective people have got great ideas and they can challenge things. They're very beneficial. You just got to learn how to open them up. Now, leaders need to learn the social cues of each member because not everybody is going to enter into a discussion or participate in a discussion the same way. Not everybody is going to contribute the same way, but people do have social cues. They could be nonverbal. They could be literally statements, verbal cues that tell you that person is ready to contribute something. Leaders must engage in inquiry and advocacy. That's part of those social cues. If I think I picked up a cue, a social cue from you, that you have something to contribute, I need to inquire, I need to ask, and then I need to advocate for your ability to be able to contribute. In other words, I'm providing you safety. I'm protecting you from other people at that moment so you can open up. As a leader, you could say to the group, I believe that Mr. Smith or Miss Smith has something to contribute on this. Let's give them a moment to fully explain what they have on their mind about this, because I really would like to know. I think they got some good ideas and I'd like to hear them. If other people try to interrupt, as the leader, we just remind them, we're letting Mr. or Miss Smith right now be able to have the floor so they can give us what they're thinking on this topic. So we have the ask-tell ratio. This comes up in multiple places in Clark's book, as I'm sure you've already discovered. That's because it's important. First of all, leaders need to ask people more things than they tell them. We're in a classroom. You pay your tuition to have me, a person who's got degrees plastered all over his wall, give you information, knowledge, so you can become wiser and better equipped and better prepared for your future. In a work environment, it's a different scenario. People don't pay their leader out of their pocket to just tell them everything. They are getting paid to do a function on a team, and they believe they are a team member, and that the leader, technically, who is also a team member, however, they're the team member in charge, should get information from them as opposed to continually telling them. How many times have we been in meetings where the person leading the meeting or the boss did all the talking? A lot, we all have often. But what we need to do as leaders is say, listen, Tuesday's meeting, Ms. Smith is going to lead this meeting. And then we, as the boss, the leader, we sit there and we pay attention. We take notes. We're not saying things. We're letting Ms. Smith run the whole entire meeting. And at the end, when it's time for the Q&A portion of a meeting, we can offer a question or two, but we want the rest of the team also to give their input through questions and responses. We don't want people to think that the second we talk, they have to keep quiet, because we cause people to self-censor at that point. So leaders need to listen more than they speak. And that's hard for a lot of people. Yours truly included at times has had problems with that. Authoritarian leaders talk more than they listen. Now, when I was a sergeant, I was definitely an authoritarian leader, except I combined it, as I've told you before, servant leadership with the authoritarian leadership to make a better team environment. And I succeeded in that. When I was operating as the authoritarian leader, it was time for me to issue an order. That was it. There was no question. We move forward now. But when we were in garrison, which means back in the office or the warehouse, whatever you want to call it, we were able to communicate in a discussion, or if we were coming up with plans, that wasn't an authoritarian moment, that was a servant leader moment. And I got the team to the point that they could tell the difference between the two. And when it was time for them to share, they just opened up and they shared their ideas and contributed. And when it was time for us to be boom, 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 order after order after order, they followed it just like they should, because there's a place for authoritarian leadership. Unfortunately, a lot of people use it in places they shouldn't. So when leaders talk more than they listen, or when they do not do this, should I say, team members can become passive and they slow down their learning. So now we digress back to the learner stage at that point. And if that happens, the team is no longer in the contributor stage, but they've gone backwards to the learner stage. You might have to do that to your team from time to time. You might have to take your team back to a stage prior, because maybe not every member was fully ready yet. And if you bring somebody into a stage and then you realize they weren't ready for it, it's okay to move them back. Clark noted that the signal to noise ratio, he discussed this and he pointed out that it is affected by the tell to ask ratio. So how much signal is there compared to the background noise? Okay, so what's noise? This is the parts of the conversation that detract or distract from the message being conveyed. It might literally be a noisy environment that you're in. It could be more than one person talking at the same time, or it could be contextually. The noise could be contextual. If I'm giving you information, but instead of giving you the information that's necessary, I'm giving you a lot of superfluous information, that's noise. It's distracting from the intent of the message. Signal, this is the actual part of the message that's being communicated. So in this instance, the signal is what I'm telling you about this particular course, the lecture I'm giving you. The noise would be if I had music in the background or other people around and talking, or if members of the class were all talking at the same time while I was attempting the lecture. Clark gave us some good advice here. He advises leaders to evaluate why their team stops listening to them. He used the two ratios, and we need to use them too. Are you or are they talking about things that do not matter? If we're supposed to be talking about psychological safety for teams, but instead I go off on several tangents talking about, I don't know, underwater basket weaving, I am bringing noise into that moment, that communicative event. Is anyone complaining during that, or are they destructively dissenting? Remember, constructive dissent is very positive. We want that. But destructive dissent is when people start talking out of turn and pointing out things that they do not like about that team or that project or task. If you're tearing down a person or the team or the business or the project, and you're not doing this in a way to show how it can be made better, but rather saying only what's wrong about it and being negative, that's destructive dissent. And also, we should never always be in permanent advocacy mode. Because if we are in permanent advocacy mode, we can stop our team from listening. And once again, advocacy mode is good and has its place, where we act as an advocate for people on our team. We may, like I pointed out earlier, stand up for them to be able to have the floor to give their ideas. Or if they say something and other people begin to ridicule or mock, we step in and say, no, we're not going to ridicule or mock. Every idea is good. We got to look at it. We may not use it, but we're going to consider it. But if we're always in that mode, that can actually stop our team from listening. We need to listen carefully. Too many times in a conversation, we hear what's being said. The vibrations caused by the vocal cords in one person's throat send out a message in the form of words that we know, the common language being used, whatever that might be. Those words come through the vibrations into our ear, through the incus malleus and stapes, through the cochlea and the auditory nerve, into the centers in our brain, and we hear the words, but we're not actually listening to the message. Many times we are preparing our rebuttal. We are preparing what we're going to say to defend our position, because the human ego is very fragile. And if I think we should do process A and you think we should do process B, I'm going to try to defend why we must do process A. And I'm trying to prepare that defense. That's not listening with care. I recently wrote some curriculum for the school, and I called this active listening. And I'm not the only one that's done that. Many people have called it that, because that's what it is. You are actively listening. You're actually getting the message, dissecting it, digesting it, and then when it is appropriate, you offer the feedback. And the feedback may be, maybe if we did it just a little differently, maybe if we added this element, or if we considered this variable, or maybe the feedback is, this is what I understood you saying, and that person says, it's not what I meant. Great. Go ahead, reformulate your message, and go ahead and say it again, because it's important that I get this. That's listening with care. When a leader tends to speak first or the most during a communication event, that team will begin to self-censor. Self-censorship, again, is when individuals clam up. They stop giving ideas. They stop talking about what they think about things, because they have realized their thoughts and their opinions do not matter to the leader or the team. So they begin to be very, very quiet. And that really is a step that we will see in the last half of this course when we look at the book by Barry Oshry. This self-censorship leads to people basically being pushed from the in-group into the out-group, and then they're treated quite differently. And we don't want that to occur. So we don't want people to self-censor. So the leaders need to learn to try to encourage their team to talk. First, the most, whatever it is, we want our people to feel free to talk. And leaders have to use a lot of maturity to avoid always speaking first, because, like I said, that human ego is so fragile. And we want to be heard. Our ideas are right. And this goes into various cognitive biases, where the person wants so badly to be right. Humans hate being wrong. That one, we find people that agree with us, and we create echo chambers. That's one cognitive bias. We begin to sell our ideas using persuasion and charisma, and people jump on the bandwagon, another cognitive bias. So there's many ways that people use this to manipulate the situation so that their ideas will be held as being the only ones that are true and right. However, that's not the case. You see, I may have ideas, but they may not be the best ideas. But if us as a team could take these ideas, mold them and shape them through that thrust and parry discussion style communication, we can formulate a new idea that's composed of parts of each and every one of us. Now we've got a much better idea. And so we have to put aside that human ego as leaders. We have to be very mature, and we got to see that the end result is what matters, not the fact that I am always right. Deliberate training. Clark noted that leaders need to help others begin to think in a way that will exceed their current position. I mentioned that when I was a sergeant, that's what I did. The people below me, I trained them for the rank that was just above them, and oftentimes it was my rank. I was basically training them to take my job. In the meantime, I was training to take the rank above me, and that worked out good in most cases. This can lead to innovation, according to Clark. Employees can get stuck in that task-based tactical mindset where they come to work and they're widget makers, and that's all they think about, instead of thinking about where do we get the resources to make the widgets? How do we design a new widget? Who do we sell the widgets to? We want people to begin to think at levels higher than they are at currently. Now, when we are stuck in that task-based tactical mindset, that is a silo approach to team membership. Information starts from the leader, flows down from top to bottom. That is not healthy in most situations. We want information to flow down from the top and from the bottom up to the top. We want information ideas coming from all other departments and everything. We want a matrix style in our structure. That tends to be the most innovative. We discussed the silo and matrix organizational structures, as I'm sure you remember. That was just a little refresher. These will help your team to begin to think for themselves if we're training them up. Will and skill. We want them to use their will and their skill, their drive and their motivation, and their technical abilities. We want them to use that. We want them to think for themselves critically, to contribute that to the team. That is contributor safety. Leaders can help their team to think freely and innovate by providing contributor safety. That also includes giving them opportunities, opportunities for new tasks, projects, learning events. And we also want to promote direct innovation, meaning the team members can innovate, that they're actively in that creative process of innovation. And where does innovation come from? It comes from creativity. What really drives creativity? Chaos. When we break away from the status quo, the way things have always been done is the status quo. When we can break out of that mold, we are now entering the realm of chaos. It may sound scary, but it's not, because there is, if we embrace the chaos, there is creativity. Innovation can emerge from there. New processes, new products, new procedures, new policies can develop from there. Things that we may never have even fathomed can emerge from there. And yes, in the organizational, managerial aspect of sociology, we have realized that the natural sciences, evolutionary biology, has been very correct on this. If you have a bird that flies from one island all the way to another island and is there in an environment with different external pressures and stimuli, their features will change. They may become larger or smaller. Their color pattern may differ depending on the predators are there. Their beaks may change in shape depending on the source of food. And this isn't instantaneous. This takes a while. But then that bird that develops is a subspecies, and that is a subspecies that emerges from the chaotic event. And I believe, if I recall, I did discuss with you bifurcations. A bifurcation graph, I don't want to do this again if I've already gone over this. If anybody in the class remembers, have I discussed bifurcation graphs yet? Okay, I guess not. Let me find one real quick. Let me find a bifurcation because it's going to help if you see it. It'll take me like 4 seconds to find one. Bifurcation Now let me just find a graph and we're in business. There we go. Bingo. We're going to start with, this should be good. No, that's a little cloudy. That's a little bit better. Okay. Let me share this now with you, okay? I'm going to stop that share. Now I'm going to share this new one. Bifurcation graphs are important. You don't necessarily have to know right now how to make one, but just understanding what it shows is going to be important. A bifurcation graph, you start off where my cursor is at. Your organization, your team is going along this path. It comes to a point of chaos. At that point of chaos, it can bifurcate one direction or another. It could be a decision to form a new team or to add members to the current team. It could be as simple as that. A decision point. Depending on what decision is made, that path now becomes the path of that team. It comes to another point of chaos, and another decision must be made. And this keeps repeating on and on and on, and can go on to infinity if the system is big enough. Now, what's curious about this is the ratio between this moment of chaos to this moment of chaos is called the Feigenbaum constant. And that ratio is the same at every single between every single bifurcation event. So right here where it seems long to here where it's really, really super short, that event, that ratio is still at the same rate, the Feigenbaum constant. And I think it's 4.6296. It's something along that lines. I used to have part of it memorized. This is true whether we're looking at a team of individuals in the workplace, or if we're looking at a distant star system, or if we are looking into at the microscopic level, the subatomic level, or dripping water from your kitchen faucet. That bifurcation ratio is always going to be the same. So that's a bifurcation graph. Now I'll stop that share and we'll get back to our slides. There we go. So we want that chaos to occur because that's when those bifurcations occur. Now, we can hold back and try to keep our team from experiencing that chaotic event, but we really can't because it's going to happen. And the longer we try to keep it from happening, the less we are going to innovate, the less creative we're going to be. We have to embrace that chaos. I have a book. This was one of the courses I took in my doctoral studies. And this is just a huge book, but phenomenal. It shows how physics can be used in our field of management and leadership. And it discusses the bifurcations and all that in here, complexity theory. And under that, you have systems theory, you have graph theory, molecular biology, you've got, what else is in there? There's a lot of things I'm not even remembering right now. They're all in there, and it's all this chaotic. We look at the chaotic events, non-linear dynamical systems. We don't live in a closed system, so our team will not be a closed system. So there will be influences from outside of the team within the organization, from social pressures from out in society, our family pressures. All these things are going to impact the team. And as a leader, we have to understand that. And understand that actually is going to be a good thing. We're going to be able to come up with a great product, such as the next great invention in communication. Who knows? We don't know. But when we stifle that creativity, when we stifle the chaos, we stay stuck in an old way of performing. So leaders, they need to continually monitor the team. This is not necessarily a daily task to accomplish, but you're always being observant. You're mindful to observe your team. You need to be in a continual state of evaluation. without making it your specific duty at that moment. You're not doing a performance review, but rather you're keeping tabs on the team. It's like when you're in the doctor's office and they check your pulse. They got their finger on the pulse of your heart. Well, you're going to have your fingers on the pulse of your team. And you do that through observational evaluation. Leaders must know when chaos is approaching. And we talked about that Feigenbaum constant. Now, you could sit there and do the math and figure out that it will probably happen within the next 5 months. You could do that. You don't need to. But just knowing that that chaotic event is going to happen, the longer that that team exists, the more frequent the chaos is going to occur as you march into the future. And that's normal. But you as the leader can harness that for innovation. So constructive dissent will help with this. Constructive dissent is having selected individuals on your team looking for processes, policies, and actions that need to be changed for the team's welfare. So in our case, I could say, Peter Houston, you are going to be the constructive dissenter for this quarter. So for the next 3 months, I want you to take time each day to go through our policies, our procedures, our practices, anything related to what we're doing, and look for things that should be changed. Challenge that status quo. And the rest of us, we just keep doing our stuff. And yes, we do challenge the status quo at times, but there's one person that's been appointed to that task for a time period. And then when the next quarter comes around, it'll be Trajan Pfeiffer's turn to be the constructive dissenter. We all take our turns at it because we see things differently. We each have a different perspective. And so if we want the team to really last over time, we need multiple sets of eyes going through everything. Destructive, well, there's a typo for you. Destructive dissent is based on ego and one's self-aggrandizing agenda. You know I don't have much of an ego because I have mistakes all over my PowerPoint. But destructive dissent, it's based on what is my plan that I want. I could be a team member, not the leader, and have my own agenda for that team. And I manipulate that team through power plays and political maneuvers. Yes, teams have a politics and there is a power dynamics in teams. And when I've written on this in the past, I discussed that, you got to understand organizations are just as political as anything else involving humans. And there are people that want power and people that abuse that power. But when we're doing all these things that is for my own agenda, and rather the team's agenda, now we're in dangerous territory. Contributor safety is juxtaposed with ego, didactic forms of communication, and authoritarian leadership. As a matter of fact, contributor safety doesn't work well in those environments. So you have to have the right environment to even develop psychological safety in general, let alone contributor safety, because contributor safety, you have to have a safe environment for your team members so that they can feel safe enough to interject their ideas, to bring their thoughts and their perceptions to that team. And that is the end of these notes. Now, we're not done for the day. We're going to finish that video with Clark. So just hold on a second. Let me get that queued up. Psychological safety is something that it has become a major part of my world in many ways, not just academically, not just as a professor, but as just a human being. I'm always wanting to see, is there a way that I can provide that inclusion safety, provide learner safety, contributor safety, challenger safety for people around me. My best friend and I, we differ greatly in our worldviews, completely opposites, but we're the best of friends because we allow for each other to be different. And we do discuss these differences.
This is really useful advice.
No, stop. We discuss the differences. We discuss them. We don't argue about them. So it is possible that people that are diametrically polarly opposite can actually get along and have psychological safety. I have our video queued up. Let me share it now. Before we go to the video, does anybody have any questions? Anybody at all? Want to open the floor up for questions? Do you have any comments? Any examples? Anything you want to contribute to this lecture today? Please feel free to. Okay, well, I don't want you to feel that you have to, but you're welcome to, and I want you to feel that through the remainder of this course. We have 12 weeks left with each other, and I want you to be able to contribute. As far as I see it, you have already gone through with this little team of students. We've gone through the inclusion stage. We've gone through into learner safety, and I'm wanting you to be in that contributor stage as well. And so I want you to feel that you are welcome to provide your insights, your perspectives, your experiences. Well, okay, we will move to the video. However, if after the video something has come to your mind that you would like to contribute, please just let me know, and I'll let you have the floor. So now we got the video coming up. Let me do a full screen. And here we go. I think we've got like about 15 minutes left on it. Remember that the gentleman with glasses, he's interviewing the gentleman with the snappy haircut. The guy with, like me, who's got some problems with having hair, he's the author. That's Timothy Clark himself, Professor Clark. So let's hear what they have to say.
There are a lot of people who work for leaders who don't follow the advice. And one of my questions is, if you don't have a leader who can create that, who does create that kind of psychological safety, then it becomes probably unfair to expect that people within the organization will have the intellectual bravery to confront them with it, because probably that will end poorly. So it's like, how do you change this other than from, you know, an aha moment from a leader or someone like you or me coming in from the outside or some other way? And I could tell you, I've come in from the outside, and I've worked with leaders for whom eventually I've walked away because I've said they're not interested in changing this behavior. They're not going to be able to. And I'm curious what advice you have for people who are, you know, in that room, who don't feel inclusion safety because the leader is not demonstrating that kind of behavior.
That reminds me, Peter, of a boss that I had earlier in my career. He was a tyrant.
What was his name? Just
No,
kidding. Just kidding.
That's right. So he was a tyrant. He ruled through fear and intimidation. He would push the fear button every day.
Mhm.
This, by the way, let me just say this to all the listeners out there. Pervasive fear on a team or in an organization is the first sign of weak leadership. That's the first sign. It's symptomatic of weak leadership. The greater the fear, the poorer the leadership. We know that. So that's the way this gentleman ruled. Fear and intimidation. And then he would come to us and say, I need your feedback. I need your feedback. I need your input. I need you to weigh in on this. Well,
who's going to do it?
It's expensive.
All right.
It's expensive, and that's what you're saying. So if you have a boss that makes the interaction expensive, then it's a very natural, reasonable response to not engage, because what are you doing? It's personal risk management. It's loss prevention. It's pain avoidance.
Right.
We're being human.
So at this point, what you're saying is, the advice to them is either accept it or leave, but don't try to be, but it will probably be too expensive for you to try to change from the middle or bottom of the organization.
It may be too expensive, but let me give you one more option. The
Okay.
other option is before you come to a conclusion about whether it's, you can't overcome it, you need to look carefully at the situation and ask yourself, how can I get this leader, this boss to listen to me?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to build credibility in his or her eyes, to build trust with him or her, so that I can begin to get some traction and get an audience with this person. So you have to think very carefully, in spite of the dysfunction, in spite of the maybe the abusive behavior, whatever it is, in spite of all of that, you got to think through, is there a way that I can build the credibility and the trust to get this individual to listen to me? Because if I can make some inroads, sometimes leaders, they're full of bluster and bravado initially, but they'll soften up.
Right.
You just build some of that credibility initially. So,
how do you do that?
The way that I would do that is I would begin by spending more time, trying to spend more time, more interaction, and ask questions. Questions are usually non-threatening, and so you've got to create more dialogue and more face time with that person. Ask more questions. They've got to get to a level of comfort that they're not at right now. And sometimes even the really hard-crusted leaders, they'll soften up and you can make gains that you never thought possible.
So let me throw in one more challenge to that, which is oftentimes with the kind of leader who's created an environment that creates fear in the culture.
Yeah.
There's like, I don't want to label, but there's like some element of narcissism, or this is about me, or right.
Sure.
And so when I start to ask, let's say I'm reporting to that person and I start to ask questions, they are only too happy to step into the role of, let me teach you, young one who doesn't know, and let me talk to you about it. And the more questions you ask, the more I'll tell you. And I'm perfectly happy in that relationship. Like, that's a great relationship. I'll keep teaching you. You keep asking me questions. I feel really great because you want to know. But that doesn't necessarily mean, if I'm that leader, that I'm ever open to them giving me advice, because
Right.
I haven't done anything to create that dynamic. The only dynamic is a dynamic that I've probably, as that leader, already encouraged, which is one where you sit quietly and ask me questions and listen and take in what I want to say.
Sure. So the other piece that we need to add to the equation is you're searching for intent. So when you're working with that executive or that leader or that boss, you're trying to understand his or her intent. If they're a pathological narcissist, you're probably going to have to write it off because it will always be too expensive to engage.
Right.
It's not going to work. But if you can carefully search for intent, and you may find that there's some pure intent there, and that this person isn't perhaps as insecure, isn't perhaps as self-serving as maybe you thought. And if you come to the conclusion that there's some good intent there, and that this person may have the ability to not hide behind title, position, and authority, which is a complete cop-out, but actually collaborate with you in good faith, then that may encourage you to take another step.
Got it.
So you're sniffing for intent.
Right.
You got to sniff hard and see what you can find.
And what's a sign of the right intent? Or what do you do to bring out a sign of the right intent?
I think you're searching for why that person does what he or she does. So what's the why behind what they do? And this is where you go into discovery mode and you ask some very carefully thought out questions to try and get at that.
So I have a thought, Tim, based on that I'm curious to know what you think about, which is, so the dilemma we're facing right now is you've got someone who loves to, who creates an environment of fear, which means that they're probably putting all the energy out and you're receiving all the energy. and you want to shift the dynamic. And asking them questions may not shift the dynamic. It may, but it may not shift the dynamic because it kind of reinforces the dynamic. But possibly a way, and I'm just thinking about this in this conversation, which is why I love these kinds of conversations, because they get me thinking too, is empathy with that person allows them to start to listen to you in a way where they may see value. So if I'm able to empathize with you, let's say you're that leader, and I'm able to say, and I'm just riffing off of what you said, which is understanding their intent, to be able to go, yeah, this must be I can see how through your eyes, this is a really challenging situation because, you're at stake for the board with this. And meanwhile, there's 6 of us who are coming from different opinions, and maybe we're advocating for our own perspective, but you're the only one holding the larger perspective. And that's got to be kind of frustrating for you and a little hard. And to have them then say, yeah, that is how I'm feeling. Now you've changed the dynamic. Now the dynamic is I'm saying something to you, you're listening and agreeing with me.
That's right.
And I've empathized with you. I've explained, I've understood you. I've understood your intent. I've understood you well enough so that you're at a point where you're looking at me not as the disciple, but as someone who actually has some insight that you agree with because I'm reflecting back what's going on for you, that you feel seen and heard in that way, which then allows you possibly the space to be interested in seeing and hearing me.
I think that's right, Peter, and I think that it demonstrates how empathy is able to diffuse defensiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But before you come to conclusions about whether you can work with a boss or not, I think you need to exhaust those possibilities.
Right.
That's what I would say.
Right.
I think you have to do it.
Great. Let's do a quick dive into stage 2 learner safety and see if we can get to stage 3 and stage 4. Just overview, because this was a sort of a fun deep dive into inclusion safety.
So inclusion safety is your foundation. Then we move to stage 2, which is learner safety. Learner safety means that I feel safe in engaging in all of the aspects of the discovery process, the learning process. So I can ask questions, I can give and receive feedback, I can experiment, I can make mistakes, and I'm not going to I'm not going to be embarrassed for it. I'm not going to be punished or marginalized.
Which is very similar to what we were sort of like the skills for creating that kind of environment are the same kind of leader that we were just talking about beforehand, that, has to sort of avoid that fear. I mean, they're kind of fighting the same battle.
That's right.
Right.
But you can see that the vulnerability level has gone up. For inclusion safety, just accept me for who I am.
Right.
But learner safety, now I'm vulnerable because I have to engage in these learning activities. I'm taking risks in the learning process, so my exposure's higher.
Great. Stage 3, contributor safety.
Right. Stage 3 means I've learned, now I want to apply what I've learned, which is the natural human need, the desire is to apply what you've learned.
Right.
So now I want to be able to act and contribute as a full member of the team, using my abilities, and I want to make a difference. So
let me ask you a question, because in my observations, I see people, because what you're doing is you're saying deeper levels, like it's, inclusion. If you want to go deeper, you go to learning. If you want to go deeper, like you have to be even more psychologically safe to contribute. And we're getting to stage 4, which is the most, which is I feel comfortable enough to challenge, right? Challenge our safety. What I find fascinating in organizations is people who are comfortable contributing, who are not comfortable learning. That I think in many organizations, learner safety is a higher bar than contributor safety, because contributor safety requires less vulnerability. Hey, I'm adding value. Hey, I'm important. Hey, I'm safe and secure. But learning requires vulnerability. It's from contributor safety, you start from a place of I know. From learner safety, you start from a place of I don't know. And I think that I don't know is a much more vulnerable, difficult way to show up, and higher value in many ways than I know and I can answer. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, Here's another pattern that we've identified. So think about the fact that we have a lot of baby boomers that are incumbents in management positions throughout industry.
Right.
So those baby boomers, many of them, many of them are here, and retirement is not too far away.
Right.
And yet they've gone into a state of skills and knowledge obsolescence.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to get from where they are to retirement without being detected.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so if your skills have become obsolete and you never cultivated an aggressive, self-directed learning disposition,
Mm-hmm.
you're in trouble because you're an anachronism. You're an antique. You don't know how to function in a highly dynamic environment.
Right.
Where we have to learn constantly. And so you're very exposed and you're very vulnerable, to your point.
Right.
So that's where the learner safety is an extremely kind of daunting thing for you to continue to learn, because you haven't followed that path.
Right. Right. No, I see that. I find that lack of learner safety is perhaps the most expensive of all of the costs of a poor psychologically safe environment. Because if you don't have an organization in which people are learning, you're capped.
Mhm.
So I find that really interesting.
That's a good point from a career development standpoint.
Right.
But let's understand though, when we go to stage 4, challenger safety, the vulnerability level is like off the charts.
Right.
Because now we're saying, I want you to take aim at the status quo.
Right.
I want you to challenge the way we do things.
Right.
That's a big ask.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's funny because I could see how it's culturally dependent also. We're talking about sort of inclusion. And I know that there are certain cultures where challenging is a lot easier to do than learning. In fact, one of the reasons why challenger safety is a higher bar for leaders is because when I create an environment that is safe for me to be challenged, it means I am willing to take the risk of learning, because I'm going to learn by being challenged. So like the vulnerability of learning is a necessity to my, as a leader, creating an environment in which I can be challenged, which I think is like why challenger safety is so high.
Well, I think that's right, and that's why it's cumulative, because
Right.
the learner safety the learning risk never goes away.
Yeah.
It never does. The vulnerability and risk associated with learning, it never goes away.
Right.
But I think there's a peak when you challenge. So if we think about innovation, that transition from contributor safety to challenger safety is what we call the threshold of innovation.
Right.
Innovation by its very nature is disruptive. It's
Right.
subversive. It undermines the status quo.
Right.
And so if the culture is not nurturing that, if the leader is not reinforcing that, it's going to be very difficult to innovate.
Right.
And so I would argue, if you look at most of the organizations that die, and they were once successful, and you do a post-mortem analysis of failure, I would argue that most of them died because they lost the culture of intellectual bravery.
Right.
And what did they get? Now what are they operating on? It's an echo chamber. It's groupthink. They've lost their adaptive capacity. They can no longer look out, absorb the competitive environment, and adjust and adapt to it. They can't do that anymore because internally they've commoditized and homogenized their thinking. They don't permit it anymore.
Right.
They don't allow it. People don't have a license to disagree. They revoke those licenses. So you can't do it.
Right.
So people don't. And that becomes the new DNA.
It's great. I love it. We have been talking with Tim Clark. His latest book, The Four Stages of Psychological Safety, Defining the Path to Inclusion and Innovation. Tim, thank you so much for being on the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
Oh, I'd love being with you, Peter. Thanks very much for having me.
With us today is Simon Sinek. We're really lucky.
Wait.
We're both
Why
in
is he
New
still
York.
talking?
We're both on the Upper West Side.
There, okay. I made him go away. So that was the video, and I think that's real interesting to hear the author himself discuss this. And he wasn't just the author, he's done a lot of research into this. And so we can take what he says as being extremely valid, along with the work of Edmondson, the professor from Harvard, I think it is, right? Yeah, I think she's at Harvard. And their work really relates together nicely. They're working on the same topic. They're in harmony with one another. We can learn a lot from them. We can use psychology. We can use all different things out there to understand our teams and our organizations. And if we can understand what makes a team work psychologically and how they relate together as a unit, we can do a lot as a leader. I also teach the organizational behavioral class, which does go into a lot of the sociology and a lot of the psychology that's involved in organizations and teams. And one thing I will say is that psychological safety, as presented by Clark and Edmondson, is vital. Many problems can be avoided. So thank you for watching that. Does anybody have any comments or questions now at this time?